Now it's Midweek with Libby Purvis.
Hello, today we speak of time moving and whirling and standing still and expressed in glorious gold and grasshoppers and dragons. Clocks by the engineer and horologist Dr. John Taylor. He is a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering and an inventor with 400 patents to his name. In fact, we were just before the programme praising you because the very electric kettle, which everyone has by their elbow in their office or home at the moment, is made possible by something you invented.
Yes, I've stumbled into inventions for kettles and started a little company in the Isle of Man in 1981, and we ended up with 75% of the world market.
And it's the thing which makes them switch off when they're hot,
it boils, yes.
rather than boiling.
There's a safety
dry.
inside if you switch it on without any water in, and it switches off every time it goes click, and when it boils, then that's a little bimetal inside.
Here you are, everybody, all over the world. Cups of tea. But what we want to talk about today is something completely at the other end, the far more glamorous end of your work. The Dragon Chronophage, which is going to be on show in Shanghai this spring, is a wonderful clock, one of the most extraordinary modern-made artefacts you're ever likely to see. It's got a precursor, which is something we can already see online, the Corpus Chronophage at Corpus Christi College, Cambridge. I've seen that working online, and people can look online. But just explain briefly how, before we get to the phage bit, why the clock itself is different. It's a different way of looking at telling the time.
Well, if you're an inventor, you never want to do anything that anybody else has done before. So when I came to design a clock as a homage to John Harrison, I had to find a new way of showing time, and all clocks have hands or are digital. I thought that would be boring to do something like that, so I had to do a new way, and I thought of showing it in lights, and the seconds don't stop on the second. It races round the dial, and time races away. When you're in your 70s, it isn't on your time, on your side.
So you've got these concentric circles. You see these concentric circles, and it's an interesting mixture of technologies, because you have these LED lights which suddenly are revealed and seem to run around.
That's right.
The blue LED lights, but the thing itself is beautiful golden brass. It feels like an old technology, a Harrison technology, but mixed up with it.
Good. That's what it was the objective, that it's to show the wonders of the grasshopper escapement, which John Harrison made to test his sea clocks by, because of course in the 18th century he couldn't listen to the BBC and get the time pips, or phone up Marbell and get the time signal. So that he had to make a clock which was accurate, against which he could calibrate his sea clocks. And the biggest problem for clocks is oil in those days, because there was only natural oils, and they all dry out or go hard.
It was in the wood, wasn't it?
So he used natural wood, lignum vitae, which didn't require, it had the oil already in it. And he built the first clock which was capable of going without oil, and it became the most accurate clock in the world for 150 years. And he was a carpenter, and the majority of it is made out of wood.
And so your clock, the one at Corpus Christi, we say chronophage because the phage means something which eats something,
yes,
isn't it? And you've got a grasshopper on top of it which opens and shuts its mouth.
Indeed.
And it seems to be dragging the time round, the grasshopper, with its claw, doesn't it?
It's controlling the clock, as the escapement has to do two things. It has to control the time and release the energy of the spring or the drive, and so that this is hidden away inside Harrison's clock. So I turned it inside out, so you can see the big escape wheel right round the outside, and the grasshopper, and it releases each second, and it races round the dial. And as the minute progresses, he opens his jaw, and on the 59th second of every minute he goes, "Ah!" He snaps it shut onto that last second, chews up the minute, eats it, and you can never get it back.
This is sinister, isn't it?
Yes, a bit scary.
This idea of never getting the time back again.
Well, time is scary if you're in your 70s. There's so much to do and so little time.
This is the Corpus Chronophage, which has got the grasshopper on.
Yes.
But the one in Shanghai is a Chinese dragon, isn't it? And does that do anything different, or does that just eat the minutes?
It still eats the minutes, and it still controls as the escapement. You can dress up a grasshopper in many guises, and this is dressed up as a dragon. He eats the minute, and at the end of the minute, his spines run a Mexican wave all down his back, and he waves his tail.
So are we all understanding all this, everybody?
Where is that?
The Corpus clock is in the centre of Cambridge and has become the visitor attraction since it's been there. It's eclipsed King's College Chapel for the number of visitors.
And the dragon?
And the dragon is on show in Shanghai in the Fine Art Fair there in March.
Yeah.
So Lottie, you should approve of this because it's using old technologies and new technologies together, and it's what you're all about, really, isn't it, in horticulture?
Well, I suppose yes, and it's that I've tried to understand before I came on the programme, and I realised you were on. I've tried to understand the workings of this clock, and I remain clueless, but very excited by what you've done, and I'd love to have one in the garden.
But it stops time, doesn't it? Briefly,
Well,
unusually
time
in a
and
clock,
time,
it stops time sometimes.
It tells relative time. And when Einstein invented relative time, people asked him for an example, and he said, well, thinking, and he was a bit of a rogue, was Einstein. If you think about it, a moment, if you sit on a park bench with a pretty girl, an hour passes in a moment. But if you sit on a hot stove for a moment, it feels like an hour. So it depends on the circumstances.
Tell me about how your inventiveness developed. Were you always a child fascinated by machines? I know your father was an inventor.
My father was an inventor, and I took it for granted that all fathers were inventors, and you would become an inventor. And from about the age of 8, I was making little things to entertain myself and my friends.
What sort of things? Tell me, I'm just trying to get the track of how an inventor's mind develops.
Well, I was, for example, I had a kite, and I had little model aeroplanes, and if you throw a little model aeroplane, it goes across the room. And I thought, well, why don't I make a little traption which will travel up the wire of the string of a kite, and when it gets to the kite, it releases the glider, and then it'll fly for a long way.
And you did that at the age of 8?
9, I think it was.
You were evacuated, weren't you? We're going to be talking in a moment about the kinder transport, but you were sent off to Canada.
To Canada, yes. I spent the war in Canada from the age of 3, travelled over. Remember very much my first memory is being on the passenger liner going down the channel in 1939, just after war had been declared, and it had a pom-pom anti-aircraft gun protection on the forecastle.
Did you have any sense of danger?
Adventure, yes. I don't think as a child you have a sense of danger. You had a sense of danger coming back in 1945 in January, when there were still U-boats around which were reported, and seeing depth charges going off from the corvettes. It was a bit more personal then.
Your whole life after that, I mean, you went into industry and you went into business. So you've had both, because you started a business, as you say, with these kettle things that stop the kettles boiling over. It seems to me that invention and innovation need a particular kind of daring, a particular kind of free thinking, a sort of what if. And when you're in business, you have to be cautious, you have to be considering losses and risks and so on. Is it ever difficult bringing the two things together?
Oh, I think it's the opposite. I think in business you have to take risks, and you have to have the conviction that you're right, and go ahead and do it anyway.
Have you ever been wrong? I mean, there must have been things of yours that
yes.
didn't work.
Yes.
And what do you do then? I mean, do you have to sort of go right back to the beginning, or
You have to learn from it. I try and learn from it the other way round. And when something goes wrong, you've got to turn that into an advantage. And if you're made an invention, it all works in your mind. The practicality may not work, but because you thought what you were doing was an invention, if you can then turn what stops it working into an advantage, then you've got a really good invention.
And so now China. How are you? Do you get on? Have you been getting on well with the Chinese? Have you been enjoying your Chinese time doing this great dragon clock?
Well, I've been going to China since the 60s, and it's just amazing to go to China because everybody there wants to get ahead. They want to have something new. They want to see how they can use it. In many Western countries, if you turn up with something new, people don't look at it. They ask how much it is. Whereas if you go to China, they want to know how it works and how they can make money out of it.
I can see Alf as a lifetime politician. Manufacturing. This is near your heart, isn't it?
I think this is wonderful. I've never met an inventor before. I'm totally taken by this.
Should meet more. That's it, I'm afraid, for this week. Thanks to Lottie Muir, John Taylor, Barbara Winton and Alf Dubbs, and to Anne Reid. Back next week when among us will be Kathy Tyson. Join us then. Goodbye.